My original plan for joining the United States Army was to spend 4 years in, go to college, and at that time I wanted to be a NASCAR mechanic. 4 years came and went. I ended up spending 11 years almost in the Army. And I want to explain to you kind of what happened, right? My plan was to do 4 years, but it didn't work out that way. And there were some things that kind of happened along that way that caused that to sort of happen for me. So I thought I'd kind of explain that to you in this video. When I first joined the Army, I wanted to be a NASCAR mechanic in my future career. So I was hoping to join the Army, be a mechanic, get out, go to college, and then try to work my way up to basically working on the cars, like working on the engines in NASCAR. Well, it turned out I was red-green colorblind, so I couldn't become a mechanic in the Army, but nonetheless, I still had the plan that, okay, well, I'm still gonna just do 4 years, get out of the Army, and then go to college, and hopefully maybe still do NASCAR or do something else. Now, I did actually lose interest in wanting to be a mechanic, but I did still have the plan of wanting to still spend 4 years in the Army, get out, use that kind of veteran experience, use that military experience to pursue a better career, a different career, right, and go to college. Well, my situation that I was in was my first contract was a 4-year contract. I spent 2 years in Fort Riley, Kansas, and then I went off to Korea, which is typically a 1-year assignment. But while I was in Korea, the Iraq War started up because that was shortly after 9/11 happened. Now, because the Iraq War was going on, they didn't really have soldiers to come to Korea to replace the people that were there on rotation, right? We were stationed there for a 1-year assignment, and then you'd have other people who would kind of come and kind of swap out with you essentially, right? But since units back in the States were deploying to Iraq, the soldiers in Korea weren't really getting replaced. So that meant we were getting involuntarily extended for 6 months, which put me in the predicament of now I don't have enough time left in the Army for them to send me back to the States. So they're going to basically have me get out of the Army from Korea, which would be challenging enough to try to have to do that from another country. That probably would have meant that I was going to have to probably like move in with my family again, back with my parents, back home in my small town in California, which was not something I wanted to do. I didn't want to go and have to move back with my parents, and especially it's a small town, there's not a lot of opportunity there. I wanted to be able to establish something near a larger city, and it was going to be hard to do that if I'm still in Korea. So my options were to suck it up and just move back home with my family when I do get out of the Army from Korea, or extend my contract, meaning re-enlist. So I chose the option to re-enlist. I re-enlisted for the bare minimum for only 2 years, but that doesn't just tack 2 years onto your contract, it really starts from when you re-enlist. So since I was re-enlisting with still basically 1 year left on my contract, the 2 years kind of started there, right? So from that point, even though I still had 1 year left, it wasn't like I had 3 more years left in the Army. I still had 2 years from that day that I re-enlisted on my contract. So that made it to where I still spent basically a little bit less than a year of that contract from the 2-year re-enlistment in Korea. And then from there, go to my next duty assignment, which was Fort Carson, Colorado. So this now meant that I was arriving at Fort Carson in Colorado with roughly a little more than a year left on my contract. And well, my unit was just coming back from a deployment to Iraq. They knew that they were going to be going back to Iraq in 1 year. And that put me in a predicament that I would need to go on that deployment with them because, like I said, I had a little bit more than a year left on my contract. So I was going to be going with them and then getting stop lossed to stay on the rest of the deployment. And if you're not familiar with stop loss, during that time in the military, right, if you were, going to be deploying with a unit, but your contract was going to be expiring sometime before that or during that, they would basically just automatically extend your contract so that way you could finish off that deployment with that unit. So regardless, I was going to be going on that deployment with them, either on stop loss, or I go back to that same plan that I ran into with Korea. I could re-enlist. I could re-enlist for 2 years. I was going to be there anyways, but also get a bonus. It wasn't much of a bonus, like $2,000, but nonetheless, get a bonus. So I took that option. Did another 2-year re-enlistment, took the little $2,000 bonus, which is less than that after taxes, but nonetheless, more than I was going to have just regardless. So did that and deployed with the 3rd ACR to Iraq for a 1-year deployment. So I finish off that deployment, get back to the States, and I'm like, all right, cool. Focus on maybe getting out of the Army now, right? It's been more than 4 years, right? I'm past my mark that I was going to get out of the Army at, but ran into another problem. So I was with the 30th ACR. They were going to Fort Hood, Texas. They were going to be moving from Fort Carson, Colorado to Fort Hood, Texas. I didn't want to go with them to Fort Hood, Texas, but even if I did want to go with them, I didn't have enough time left in the Army to go with them. So I was like, okay, well, then cool. I'll just get to stay here at Fort Carson and finish off my time and get out of the Army. Nope. So it turns out that because of how they were kind of structuring things for units that were going to be deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, they wanted you to be able to have at least a year to train up with the unit before you go on that deployment. Because I was going to have less than a year left in the Army, they didn't want to keep me at Fort Carson. They told me that basically I was probably going to come up on orders for Korea, which would put me back in that same boat that I was in the beginning of my contract. So I was a little bit worried, but I figured, well, I don't want to go back to Korea. I would like to stay in Colorado. Probably going to end up deploying again. Hope for the best. So again, re-enlisted. This was actually the last time though, but re-enlisted one last time for a 2-year contract. And then I went over to the 4th Infantry Division where I knew I was going to be deploying. So went on a deployment. Now, I was hoping that maybe by the time that deployment was over with, my unit was not going to be deploying anytime soon when we came back, so I'd be okay because that was a 15-month deployment. So I was hoping that because we were going to be there for 15 months, we should be getting 15 months back stateside before the next deployment, and I'd be able to ETS in that time frame anyways and not have to worry about it. But also, thankfully, the president ended up getting rid of the stop loss thing so that stop loss didn't become effective anymore, so it didn't even matter. So they got rid of stop loss. So when I came back to the States, I was now on track to be able to just get out of the Army like I planned on, just a lot later than I planned on. So in the end, I was finally actually able to just get out of the Army, ETS. I did almost 11 years. And I know there are some people that may be watching this and be like, that's more than halfway. You could have just stuck it out for another 10 years, another 9.5 years, and retired. Why the hell didn't you do that? Well, if you're interested in that, let me tell you. At that time in the Army, units were deploying every other year. So I knew that if I was going to stay in the Army for, let's say, the bare minimum, roughly about 10 years, and that's not even guaranteed either. I mean, you can put in your packet and request retirement, but could get denied, and you could end up being 25 years, 30 years, whatever the case is. But nonetheless, 10 years, let's say, that probably means I would have deployed possibly 5 more times, possibly, because of the frequency in which units were deploying. And I didn't want to have to go on some kind of combat deployment every other year. That possibly wouldn't have been the case. I mean, most likely, I didn't know at that time, but most likely is what would have probably happened is, yeah, I probably would have gone on probably 2 more deployments. And assuming I survive those 2 more combat deployments, I probably would have ended up on some kind of orders for some kind of like schoolhouse to probably be a drill sergeant, to maybe be an AIT instructor, who knows, right? Because they probably wouldn't have made me do that many deployments back to back to back to back. I probably would have came up on some kind of orders to probably be a recruiter, something along those lines because of my experience, and they just don't want to burn soldiers out by making them do that many deployments. Sometimes it happens, but I probably had a good chance that I probably would have fell into that realm where I probably wouldn't have done that many deployments, but I didn't know that at that time. I was also just ready to do something else with my life. I didn't want to keep doing the Army. Again, I only wanted to do 4 years, get out, go to college, and then move on to something else. I was only in that situation doing almost 11 years because of multiple kind of scenarios. So in the end, I didn't want to go and spend 20 plus years in the Army. It wasn't my desire to do that. I just kind of got stuck in that kind of situation for personal reasons where I didn't feel it was a good time to get out of the Army. So sucked it up, continued doing what I got to do. And then when the time was right, then moved on with my life to do something else. And I don't regret it, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. Mostly don't regret it, I would say. Because again, I have no idea what could have happened on multiple more deployments after that, especially because it was very busy during that time frame. So there's, I would say, a very extremely high chance that at least I would have gone on probably 2 more deployments. And like I said, you don't know if you're going to survive those deployments. I didn't want to take that risk, right? I wanted to move on and do something that I was enjoying because I wasn't enjoying the Army anymore. I hadn't been enjoying the Army for several years towards the end. I was ready to move on for something else. For some individuals, the Army may be great for them. For some, it's just a stepping stone. That's what I looked at it. I looked at it as a great stepping stone to get great experience, great discipline, great all sorts of things, and then move on to something else. There was no intention ever for me to stay in the Army for 20 plus years and retire. So me getting out at 11 years, even though it was pretty much halfway to retirement. Doesn't matter to me. That wasn't my goal. Would you want to stick around for 10 more years, which is a long time, especially in the military world, and stick it through a job that you don't like just for a pension on the end? It's not worth that, right? There's a lot of other things to live for than just that pension at the end of the 20 years. The route I chose was still a great route. I still ended up going off to do great things. I still went to college. I got an education in television and radio. I got a great job being an instructor with the United States Army, not directly for the Army, but through a contracting kind of a thing, being an instructor, and that's great. And I still kind of do that. I still do that essential job as being an instructor on Fort Carson, teaching soldiers, and I enjoy that. So I wouldn't replace that experience with staying in the Army and a job that I didn't like for 10 more years and then get a pension from a retirement thing. I mean, sure, I get some VA money, but nonetheless, that's not that important, right? My importance, the important thing that was to me was being happy in life. And that's what you got to do. You got to, don't just force yourself to do something you don't want to do because of this, right? You got to be happy. You don't want to be in some kind of miserable job for X amount of time when you could have spent that time more wisely. And I feel like I did do that. I didn't just go through the grind of waiting until I got to retirement to be able to retire. I did something I enjoyed and something I had good fun doing. Yeah, does that make sense? I think so. Now, you may have noticed back there on my uniform that I got out as a sergeant, as an E5. And there's a reason why I didn't make it to staff sergeant. I actually have a video right here that explains that story as to why I didn't make it to staff sergeant. So if you want to learn about that, go check that out. Nonetheless, though, I appreciate you for being here and watching this video. I'm Christopher Chaos. Hit that thumbs up. I'll see you next time. See ya.